What would you do if the most dangerous man in New Orleans showed up at a hospital with blood on his hands, looking for the woman who had just pulled his son out of a burning car, and she was the only one who hadn't run? It was 11:47 on a Tuesday night when Lena Marsh missed her bus by 30 seconds. She watched the taillights disappear around the corner and didn't bother running after them. She had stopped running for things that weren't going to wait for her a long time ago. Her feet hurt in the particular way that came from 10 hours on a linoleum floor. The kind of hurt that started at the heel and worked its way up through the knee until the whole leg felt like something borrowed and overdue. She shifted the strap of her bag higher on her shoulder and started walking. The hospital was 6 blocks east. The shelter wasn't. Lena worked the night intake desk at St. Augustine's Memorial 3 nights a week and did laundry folding at a facility on Magazine Street the other 2. Between the 2 jobs she made almost enough to keep the lights on in her studio apartment on the 3rd floor of a building where the elevator had not worked since March. She was 26 years old. She had $12 and a cracked phone in her coat pocket. She had a notice from her landlord folded into her wallet that she hadn't opened yet because she already knew what it said. New Orleans in November felt nothing like the postcards. It was wet in the way that meant you never got dry, cold in the way that meant you never got warm. The streets near the quarter smelled like river water and fried things, and something older underneath that she had never been able to name. She liked it, despite all of that. She had grown up in a town in Mississippi where nothing happened and no one stayed, and this city at least had the decency to be loud about its trouble. She turned down Dauphine Street because it was shorter, even though it wasn't well lit. That was how she saw the car. It had jumped the curb and come to rest against the iron fence of an old garden, the front end crumpled into the iron bars. The engine was still running. One headlight pointed sideways at the brick wall of the building beside it. The other had gone dark. Smoke rose from somewhere beneath the hood, not thick enough to be fire yet, but close. Lena stopped walking. The smart thing was to call 911 and stay back. She reached for her phone. She had already dialed the first 2 numbers when she heard it. Small, high. A sound like a question being asked by someone who didn't know what question to ask. She moved closer before she decided to. There was a child in the back seat. A boy, maybe 5 or 6. He was conscious, which was the first relief. He was pressed against the far door with his hands over his ears and his eyes squeezed shut. The smoke was thicker near the passenger door. The driver was slumped over the wheel. A man, unconscious but breathing. She could see his chest moving from where she stood. The boy had a cut above his eyebrow that was bleeding down his face, and the blood had reached his collar, and he was not making a sound anymore, which somehow frightened Lena more than the crying had. She finished the 911 call. She told the operator the address. She told them there was smoke. Then she tried the door handle. It opened. Later she would think about that. Later she would understand that in that moment she had made a choice, and the choice had remade her life entirely. But standing on the sidewalk in the cold, with her bag sliding off her shoulder and her feet aching, and her $12 in her pocket, she didn't feel like a woman making a decision. She felt like a woman doing the only possible thing. She climbed halfway into the back seat and put her hand out toward the boy. He flinched. "Hey," she said, "don't look at the smoke, look at me." He opened his eyes. They were dark, very dark, and he looked at her the way children looked at strangers, assessing, measuring, deciding. He was bleeding and he was scared and he was measuring her in 3 seconds the way some children could. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said. "I need you to take my hand." "My dad," he said. "Help is coming for your dad. Right now I need you." He reached for her hand, small fingers, cold. She pulled him out of the car and away from the vehicle, 10 feet, 20, until her back was against the opposite wall, and the boy was pressed against her front with her coat wrapped around him, and the smoke behind them thickening toward something worse. The engine caught. The fire moved fast after that. She turned the boy's face into her shoulder so he wouldn't see it. Sirens arrived in 4 minutes. She counted. The paramedics took the boy first, then went back for the driver. A firefighter told her to step back. She stepped back. She gave a statement to a police officer who wrote things in a notepad and looked at her over the top of it, like he was trying to figure out what category to put her in. She gave him her name. She gave him her phone number. She answered his questions. She did not tell him she was cold. She did not tell him her coat was gone, wrapped around the boy, probably ruined. She just answered the questions until he ran out of them, and then she asked if she could go. He said she could. She was half a block away when she heard someone call her name. Not the officer. Someone else. A woman in a black coat who had appeared from the direction of the ambulance, moving quickly and with the focused energy of a person who did not waste movement. Lena Marsh? Lena turned. Yes. Mr. Aldric Vane would like a word with you. Lena had heard the name. Everyone in New Orleans had heard the name, the same way everyone in a city heard the name of the thing that ran underneath it. Aldric Vane. Real estate, they said, if they were being polite. Infrastructure. Old money over new muscle. Vane Construction had rebuilt 3 neighborhoods after the last hurricane, and now owned enough of those neighborhoods that the city had started having private feelings about it. His name appeared in newspapers in the way powerful men's names appeared, often near the front, never in a way that was entirely comfortable. What for? Lena asked. The woman in the black coat looked at her steadily. You helped his son tonight. The hospital waiting room on the private floor smelled like antiseptic and money. Lena had been to this hospital before. She worked at St. Augustine's 3 blocks away, which was where they took people who didn't have choices. But she had never been on this floor. There were fresh flowers. The chairs didn't have tears in the cushions. A man in a dark suit brought her coffee without being asked, and she held it with both hands because she was colder than she had realized. She sat in the chair for 11 minutes before Aldric Vane walked in. He was not what she expected, which was its own kind of trouble. She had expected something easier to dismiss. What she got was a man in his late 30s who moved like someone who had learned to fill space deliberately rather than carelessly. Tall, dark suit, no tie, top button open. A bruise was forming along his jaw from the accident. So he had been in the car too, she registered. He had been the driver. His right hand was wrapped in gauze. His eyes were the flat, considered gray of someone who did not offer information freely. He looked at her the way she had looked at him, trying to figure out the category. Lena Marsh, he said. That's me. He sat across from her, not beside her, which she noted. Direct angle. No attempt to reduce the distance between them artificially. He rested his forearms on his knees and looked at her without the performance that powerful men usually wrapped themselves in when they wanted something. You pulled my son out of the car. I called 911 and helped him out of the back seat. That's not the same as pulling someone out. Something shifted in his expression, not warmth exactly, more like recalibration. He stopped crying when you talked to him. Lena looked at the coffee in her hands. Kids decide fast whether they trust you. He just decided. Why did you stop? Because there was a child in the car. You could have waited on the sidewalk. Yes. Most people would have. I know. He was quiet for a moment. There was a monitor somewhere nearby that beeped softly, and she thought she could hear it through the wall. She thought about the boy's face when she had told him not to look at the smoke, about the way he'd pressed his face into her shoulder. His name is Callum, Vane said. He's 6. He has a cut that needed 8 stitches and a bruise on his ribs. The doctor says he'll be fine. Good, Lena said, and meant it entirely. Vane studied her. You gave the police officer your name and address. He asked for them. You didn't ask for anything in return for what you did. There's nothing to ask for. I helped a kid out of a car. Most people, Vane said carefully, find a way to make that transactional. Lena looked at him. I'm not most people. That's not modesty, it's just true. He almost said something, stopped, then, where do you work? She told him. Both jobs. She didn't know why she told him both. Maybe because the coffee was warm and she was tired and she had already decided she had nothing to hide from a man who could find it all out in 20 minutes anyway. He listened without interrupting, which she noted. Men with that much money usually interrupted. You took off your coat, he said. It was cold. You gave it to my son. He wasn't wearing one. Vane looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, which she hadn't expected. She stood too, out of reflex. I'd like you to come back tomorrow, he said. For what? Callum is asking for the woman who smelled like the hospital and talked to him about smoke. His voice was even, but there was something underneath it. You don't have to. But he's asking. Lena thought about her shift the next morning. She thought about the unopened notice in her wallet. She thought about the boy's cold fingers closing around hers. What time? She said. She came back the next morning, and the morning after that. Callum was a quiet child with very dark eyes and the specific seriousness of a child who had spent too much time around adults. He didn't talk much at first. He asked her once why she always had a pen behind her ear, and she told him she wrote things down so she didn't forget them, and he considered that for a long time and then asked if he could have the pen. She gave it to him. He drew a boat on the back of a hospital menu and gave it back. For you, he said, so you don't forget. She didn't forget. Aldric Vane came in the evenings when his work allowed. She was usually leaving when he arrived. They passed each other in the hallway twice, 3 times. He always stopped. He never filled the silence with noise. She noticed that about him. The way he treated silence like something with edges, something to be careful with. On the 3rd day he told her, without preamble, that Callum's mother was not in the picture. He knows I'm telling you, Vane added. He said I should explain before you started wondering. Lena looked toward the room where the boy was sleeping. 6-year-olds don't usually say that. Callum isn't usually 6. She almost smiled. What happened? Vane leaned against the wall with his arms folded. He spoke the way people spoke about things they had made their peace with, and then found they hadn't entirely. Callum's mother had been gone for 3 years. She had not died. She had simply decided that the version of this life she had signed up for was not the one she was living. She had left a note. She had left a forwarding address. She had not used it. He doesn't ask about her much anymore, Vane said. That worries me more than when he did. Lena understood that. She understood the specific grief of children who stopped asking because they'd learned that asking was its own kind of pain. She said so. Vane looked at her with the expression of someone who had not expected to be understood. How do you know that? He said. I grew up in foster care. She said it the way she said most things about her past, plainly, without asking for a response. You stop asking for certain things when you figure out they're not coming. Vane said nothing for a moment. That's an honest thing to say to someone you've known 4 days. You told me about his mother. He thought about that. Fair, he said. She went back to her life after Callum was discharged. 2 jobs, $12, the unopened notice that she had finally opened and which said exactly what she'd known it would say. She had 30 days. She started doing the math that she'd already done 6 times, and which still came out the same way. There was no version of the numbers that worked. She could ask her supervisor at St. Augustine's for more hours, but they'd already told her the budget was frozen. She could pick up a 3rd job, but there were only so many hours in a week. She had already cut everything that could be cut. She had been eating 1 real meal a day for 3 weeks and telling herself it was temporary. It wasn't temporary. It was just her life, arranged close to its edges. She was coming off her shift on a Thursday when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail. Lena Marsh. She recognized the voice before she recognized that she recognized it. Mr. Vane. Aldric, he said. I have something I'd like to discuss with you. Not on the phone. Would you be willing to meet? The office Vane used in the city was not where she would have imagined him. Not glass and chrome downtown, but an older building on Esplanade with high ceilings and wood floors and windows that looked onto a courtyard full of November bare crepe myrtles. He was already standing when she arrived. Callum was not there. A woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Okafor brought water and then left. Vane said, I'll be direct. Please, Lena said. He told her that Callum had a behavioral consultant, a tutor, 2 nannies, a household staff, and a private physician. What he did not have, according to Dr. Renata Park. She noted he said the name as if citing a source, not making small talk, was a consistent adult presence who treated him like a child rather than a schedule item. He had been withdrawn since the accident. He had not drawn since the accident. He had asked for Lena once. 3 days ago, and had not asked again, which Vane said was the thing that worried him. Children stop asking, Lena said quietly. I know, you told me. She looked at him. He was watching her with that same measuring calm, but there was something behind it now that hadn't been there in the hospital hallway. Not desperation. Aldric Vane did not do desperation. Something closer to the expression of a man who had solved every problem that money could solve, and was standing in front of the first one it couldn't. What are you asking? I want to hire you. Not as a nanny, not as a staff position, as someone whose job is to know what Callum needs before the people being paid to know it do. He paused. You saw him in 30 seconds in a burning car. You knew not to make him look at the smoke. My staff has known him for 2 years, and nobody thought to look for him in a carpool line last week when he wandered away from the pickup point. Lena sat with that. I'm not qualified for whatever title you're describing. You're the only person who was qualified for what you did. Credentials didn't have anything to do with it. I worked 2 jobs. I have rent due. I know both numbers, the rent and the account balance. She felt the familiar heat of a private thing being exposed. Not anger yet, but close. You had me looked into. You had access to my son. I saved your son. Yes, his voice didn't harden. And I needed to know who you were. That's not an apology. It's an explanation. She looked at the window. The crepe myrtles moved in the November wind, their branches bare and pale. She thought about the boy with 8 stitches above his eye drawing a boat on a hospital menu. She thought about her 3rd-floor apartment, and the elevator that didn't work, and the notice in her wallet. What does this actually mean day to day? She said. He told her. Reasonable hours, a room as she wanted it, a salary that made her go still in her chair because it was not a number she had ever been in a room with before. Medical coverage, the debts that had been accrued since the incident with her landlord. She hadn't told him about those. He had found them anyway, cleared. Why? She said, and she meant the last part. Because people who do the right thing when they have every reason not to deserve to stop drowning. He said it without sentiment. And because my son needs someone in his life who saw him as a child before she knew my name. Lena was quiet for a long time. If I take this, she said. I'm not a yes man. I'll tell you when something is wrong, even if it's something you're doing. Vane's expression didn't change. I expect that. I won't hide things from Callum to protect your comfort. I'd be concerned if you did. And I need to think about it. I'll have an answer ready, he said, whenever you have a question. She thought about it for 18 hours. She walked across the city and back. She sat in her apartment with the unopened mail that was now opened and the lights on because she still had power, barely. She thought about the women at St. Nope, Augustines, who came through the intake desk at 2 a.m. with children in their arms and nowhere to be except here. She thought about how she had grown up as one of those children, and what it had meant to have one adult, just one, who treated her like she was worth the effort. She thought about Callum not drawing anymore. She called the number at 9 in the morning and said yes. The house on Prytania Street was not a house in any sense. Lena had applied the word before. It was a house in the sense that it had rooms and a roof and a staircase, but it was also the kind of house that had its own internal logic, its own gravity, the kind of place that made you aware of your own footsteps. She was given a room on the 2nd floor, down the hall from Callum's. It was larger than her apartment by a measurement she didn't want to calculate. The window looked onto the courtyard. There was a writing desk she didn't know what to do with. Callum came to the doorway on the first evening and looked at her with his serious dark eyes. You came back, he said. I said I would. He thought about that. People say that. I know. She was sitting on the edge of the bed. She pointed at the pen behind her ear. Remember this? He looked. The forget things pen. Still have it. She pulled it out and held it up. Kept it so I wouldn't forget. Something in his face eased in the way that faces eased when a person decided to believe something. He came and sat on the floor near the desk, not close but in the room. After a while he asked if she had any paper. She found some in the desk drawer. He drew in silence for 20 minutes. A house this time, not a boat, with a tree beside it and 2 figures standing under the tree. He didn't explain it. She didn't ask. The next weeks arranged themselves around Callum. Mornings she walked him through the garden when it wasn't raining, which was not often enough to be reliable. She learned that he was afraid of ceiling fans but would not say why, so she simply made sure none of them were on when he was in a room. She learned that he liked to know what was going to happen before it happened. Not because he was controlling, but because surprise had stopped feeling safe at some point. And she understood that completely. She told him the day's plan at breakfast every morning in order. He ate more. He talked more. He started drawing again in the evenings, sitting on the floor of whatever room she was in. Aldric Vane watched all of it from a measured distance. He was careful with her, in the beginning, in a way that she noticed. Not cold, careful. Like a man who had learned to take up space and was now consciously trying to take up less of it. He did not give her orders. He asked questions. When she told him that Callum needed a lighter schedule on Tuesdays because the end-of-the-week cluster of tutoring sessions was overstimulating him, Vane cancelled 2 things and didn't explain to anyone why. When she told him the nanny on the East Wing was ignoring what Callum said, when he said he was cold, Vane spoke to Mrs. Okafor, and the nanny stopped working there. He did not consult her about it. He just did it. "You didn't have to do that quietly," she said when she found out. "You could have told me. It was handled. You didn't need the details." "I appreciate the outcome," she said. "But I live in this house with your son, and I need to know when things change." He looked at her steadily. "You're right. No argument, no explanation, just acknowledgement." She didn't know what to do with that, so she went back to work. The threat arrived the way trouble arrived in houses like this. Quietly, then all at once. The first sign was a phone call Vane took, at 11 at night, that left him standing in the hallway outside Callum's room with his jaw set and his eyes somewhere else. The second was the SUV that had been parked across the street for 3 days in slightly different positions, which she noticed because she walked past it every morning with Callum, and she made it her business to notice things that didn't change when they should. The third was the name she heard Vane say through a half-open study door. Garrett Rowe, spoken in the tone people reserved for things they were trying not to fear. She asked Vane about it directly. He said it was a business matter. She told him she had seen the SUV. He went still. How long? 3 days. He called someone on his phone immediately, turning away from her. She heard him say Garrett Rowe a second time, and then the name of a street, and then nothing useful. When he turned back, his face had rearranged itself into the version he wore when he didn't want to say something. "Tell me," she said. "It's not your concern. If it's near Callum, it's my concern." He looked at her. "Garrow is someone I once trusted with things that made him dangerous. He has since decided that my change in priorities," he paused, "constitutes weakness." "Your change in priorities," she repeated. Vane looked toward Callum's closed door. That was answer enough. He means Callum, Lena understood. He means that loving his son openly, visibly, changed how certain people calculated his vulnerabilities. She had read about this in case notes at St. Augustine's, about men who used children as leverage, and she had always found it incomprehensible in the abstract. It was not abstract now. "Does he know about me?" she said. The pause before his answer told her everything. He knows someone new is close to Callum. She didn't sleep well that night. She got up at 2 and sat in the chair by her window and looked at the courtyard below. The bare crepe myrtles, the iron fence, the shadow where the streetlight didn't quite reach. She thought about the SUV. She thought about Callum drawing his houses and trees. She thought about the pen behind her ear that she had kept as a ridiculous little promise to herself that she was going to stay. She had made the choice to stay. She understood now what that meant. 2 days later, Vane's head of security, a tall man named Declan, who had a kind of stillness that came from seeing a great deal and deciding not to carry it visibly, pulled her into a room and showed her a photograph on his phone. A man outside the coffee shop on Magazine Street where she went every Wednesday morning. She had been photographed in the background, Callum beside her, both of them holding cups. "Does Rowe have this?" she said. "We believe so." "Then he knows exactly who I am." Declan looked at her carefully. "Are you going to leave?" She thought about it the way she thought about most serious things. directly, without drama. She thought about her apartment, which was gone now, her things in storage. She thought about how Callum had walked into a room this morning and sat on the floor with his sketchpad without asking, just sat down, like the floor in her room was a place that belonged to him. "No," she said, "but I need to know what comes next." Vane told her everything that night. She sat across from him in the study, and he told her about Garrett Rowe and the way people told stories they had been carrying in compressed form for a long time. Rowe had been, before everything, a close ally, not a friend. Vane did not use that word, but someone trusted with the operational infrastructure of an enterprise that Vane described in careful language that told her exactly what it was and was not. After Callum's mother left, and Vane had contracted and closed off and become, in Rowe's assessment, inefficient with grief, Rowe had made certain investments of loyalty that were now in conflict with Vane's survival. "He thinks Callum made me slow," Vane said. "Did he?" Lena asked. Vane was quiet for a moment. "He made me consider what I was willing to lose." He looked toward the door, toward the hallway, toward wherever Callum was sleeping. "That is not the same as slow, but Rowe doesn't make the distinction." Lena looked at her hands. "And me. You are visible. You matter to Callum. That makes you a variable. A useful one or a dangerous one. In Rowe's calculation, any variable that can be threatened is dangerous." She stayed in her chair and thought about this with the same plainness with which she thought about most things. She was not special in this city. She was a woman who had grown up with nothing, and had arranged a careful life from scraps, and she was not going to be made into a hostage by a man she had never met. "What are you going to do about it?" she said. Vane looked at her with the expression of someone who had expected a different kind of conversation. "I'm going to remove him," he said. "From the equation." "Yes." "Without doing something that Callum will understand in 10 years and have to carry." Vane went still. It was a different kind of still than his usual one. "He watches you," Lena said. "He watches how you handle things. He is learning from you right now what kind of man a man gets to be. I'm telling you this because it's my job to tell you, not because I expect you to agree." The room was quiet for a long time. "I know," he said finally. "That's all I needed." Declan moved on Rowe's operation over 4 days, quietly, using channels that Lena did not understand and did not need to. What she understood was the outcome: accounts traced, pressure applied in the specific places where pressure produced honesty, a conversation with federal contacts that Vane did not participate in directly, but whose existence he did not deny. Rowe's position collapsed in the way that positions collapsed when their foundations were made of other people's silence, which was to say that it collapsed entirely, and in a way he had not seen coming, because he had been watching for violence, and what came for him instead was paperwork. It was gone. The SUV across the street was gone. Declan told her on a Tuesday morning, and she told Callum they were going to get coffee and walk through the park, and they did. Callum found a dead bird in the park and stood over it for a long time. "Did it hurt?" he asked. "I don't think so," Lena said. "I think it was just finished." He looked up at her. "Is that what dying is, being finished?" "I think sometimes it is." He thought about that. Then he reached over and took her hand, not because he was scared, just to hold it. And they stood there for a while longer looking at the bird, and then they walked back to the coffee cart and he got a hot chocolate and she got a black coffee. And he told her very seriously that her coffee smelled like a bad decision. She laughed harder than she had in months. The kitchen on Sunday was Lena's favorite room in the house. Mrs. Okafor did not work Sundays, which meant the kitchen was loud and disorganized in a way the rest of the house was not. Callum had decided, without asking anyone's permission, that Sunday was the day Lena taught him to cook something. He was bad at it, which delighted him. She was patient with it, which delighted him more. Aldric Vane came in on the 3rd Sunday and stood in the doorway. "What is this?" he said. "Pancakes," Callum said with the confidence of someone who had made one successful pancake and was now an expert. "They're catastrophically uneven," Vane said. "They taste fine," Lena said. Vane looked at the pan. "That is not a pancake shape." Callum looked at his father very seriously. "Shapes don't change the flavor, Dad." Vane looked at Lena. Something in his face was trying not to do something. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She handed him a plate. The pancake was genuinely uneven and slightly too dark on one side, and Callum watched his father take the first bite with an expression of absolute anticipation. "Well?" Callum demanded. Vane chewed, set his fork down, looked at Callum. "Shapes definitely don't change the flavor." Callum beamed. Lena turned back to the stove before her expression gave her away. These small things, she had not expected the small things. Vane was different in the kitchen than he was anywhere else in the house. He took up less space, deliberately, in a way that she recognized as effort. He asked Callum questions about the week rather than reports from his nanny. He listened when Callum talked about the bird. He said he was sorry the bird was dead, which was such a simple thing and so clearly the right thing that Lena looked away from both of them because the moment was private. Later, after Callum had gone to his room with flour on his shirt and a story to tell himself about his own competence, Vane stayed at the kitchen table. He had coffee. She had the second cup she hadn't meant to pour. The courtyard outside was cold and bright, winter sun on bare branches. "You said you'd tell me when something was wrong," he said. "Yes." "Is something wrong?" She looked at him. He was asking with the careful look of a man who had decided honesty was worth the risk of the answer. "No," she said, "but something is changing." His hands were still around the coffee cup. "I know. That complicates things." "Yes." "I won't let it complicate, Callum." "Neither will I." He said it without hesitation, which meant it was not a reassurance, it was a fact. She looked at the courtyard. She had lived inside careful arrangements her whole life. She knew how to manage what she felt. She knew how to keep things in the categories where they functioned. She also knew, sitting in this kitchen, that some things did not stay in categories. "One thing at a time," she said. He looked at her. "That sounds like a yes with conditions." "It's a yes with patience." A long pause. Then he said, "I can work with that." Callum started sleeping through the night without waking after the second month. He started talking to his tutor instead of through her. He started asking, in the mornings, what the day's plan was before she could tell him, because he was learning to look forward rather than brace. The ceiling fans got turned back on. He still didn't explain why they had frightened him, but he stopped flinching when they were on. And eventually he stopped noticing them, and eventually she thought he had simply moved past it without ceremony, which was the way some things needed to go. Spring came slowly to New Orleans the way spring came to a city that had to fight the year round for it. The crepe myrtles in the courtyard leafed out in pale green first, then darker, and the fountain Callum had declared boring was turned on, and he declared it considerably less boring with new eyes. Lena's room had accumulated things. A second pen on the desk. A jacket from a Sunday market she'd gone to with Callum. Books from the shelf Vane had told her to use freely. A drawing Callum had given her of the three of them standing in the courtyard, labeled in his handwriting. Him, her, and his father, the father figure slightly taller than the paper could comfortably contain. She had taped it to the wall beside the window. One afternoon she found Vane standing in the garden looking at the crepe myrtles, with the look of a man who had come outside to think and had forgotten to stop. She came and stood beside him. "Callum's tutor says he told her I was his family," she said. Vane looked at her sideways. "Is that a problem?" "No," she considered. "I just wanted you to know he said it." He looked back at the trees. "Do you think he's right?" She thought about it the way she thought about most serious things. She thought about the pen, the boat, the bird. She thought about $12 and a broken elevator and a notice in a wallet. She thought about cold fingers and smoke and the 11:47 bus she had missed. "I think," she said, "that family is mostly a decision, and I decided a while ago." Aldric Vane turned to look at her with the expression she had come to know, the one that meant he was filing something away somewhere important, somewhere he would keep it. He reached for her hand in the way of a man who is being careful about the difference between taking and asking. She let him. In his room upstairs, Callum was drawing. He had filled a full sketch pad since January. Trees, boats, houses, birds, figures in courtyards, figures in kitchens, figures standing together in the particular close but not touching way of people who had decided to be in the same place on purpose. He filled page after page without being asked, without it being required of him, because the world had started to feel like something that belonged to him again, and when the world felt like that, It turned out he had a great deal to say. The last drawing in the sketch pad was the courtyard, from above, the way a bird might see it. Two figures standing in the garden, one tall, one not quite as tall, together in the space between the fountain and the crepe myrtles, and in the corner of the page, because he had run out of room in the center, a small notation in his handwriting. Just 3 words. We are here. I keep thinking about the moment Lena almost kept walking. She had every reason to. $12 in her pocket. Feet that hurt from 10 hours on a hospital floor. A notice from her landlord she hadn't opened yet because she already knew what it said. The bus was gone and the street was dark, and the smart thing, the thing that survival had spent years teaching her, was to keep her head down and get home. She didn't keep walking, and that one choice rewrote everything that came after. I don't think what happened to Lena was luck. I think it was the result of who she had spent her whole life deciding to be, even when being that person cost her. She had grown up with nothing. No safety net, no family name, no door that opened easy. What she had developed instead was a kind of moral clarity that most people never build because they never have to. She knew exactly what it looked like when a child needed someone to stop. She stopped. That's what I'd call a kind of integrity that doesn't need an audience. It doesn't announce itself. It just acts in the dark when nobody's watching, when there's nothing in it for you except a cold walk home afterward. And then there's the intelligence of how she moved through what came next. Lena didn't walk into Aldric Vane's world with her eyes closed. She asked questions. She paid attention to what changed in the hallway when he took a phone call. She noticed the SUV parked in the same block for 3 days. She understood, before anyone told her, that being close to Callum made her visible in a dangerous way. She didn't panic about it. She asked Declan directly. She told Vane directly. She didn't wait for a problem to become a crisis before she named it. That's not naivety. That's a particular kind of sharpness that comes from growing up without much margin for error. People who have always had a cushion sometimes can't see trouble coming because they've never had to. Lena had always had to. And then there was Callum. The boy who had stopped asking for things because he learned that asking was its own kind of pain. I understand that child. A lot of us understand that child. What Lena did for him wasn't magic. It was consistency. She showed up. She told him the plan every morning. She kept the pen he'd given her. She stayed when staying got complicated. That's the part people underestimate. How much it takes to outlast the distrust a hurt child is built to protect himself. It takes endurance. The quiet, unglamorous kind that doesn't get acknowledged. It just continues. What I take from this story is something I think about a lot. The things that change our lives are almost never the big dramatic moments we imagine are coming for us. They're the small choices we make when we're tired and cold and the bus has already left. They're the questions we ask when it would be easier to stay quiet. They're the days we show up when we didn't technically promise to. Lena didn't save Callum by being extraordinary. She saved him by being decent, paying attention, and refusing to quit. Those 3 things, in my experience, account for most of the good that actually happens in the world.